So I'm Phil, as Tom just said, and this is Jennifer, my colleague. And I'd just like to thank you all for coming today. It's a really good turnout. Great to see you all. And we are delighted and honoured to be here to talk about our first game, Tengami. And we're just going to share a little bit about the game and about the company that we started 2 years ago. So I've been making games for nearly 15 years now, longer than I care to admit. And 13 of those were spent at Rare. And I began as a programmer and as a tools programmer. And then from there I went on to become a lead programmer and ultimately the director of gameplay for the whole company. And pretty much I've always wanted to make games. Ever since I was about 8 years old, and my father brought home Spectrum 48 for me. And I think most of you are probably too young to have had the joy of having a Spectrum. But it was very influential on me, and from that point onwards I decided I wanted to make games. And so after I finished studying at university for 3 years, I did a computer science degree. At the time there weren't really these kind of game degrees, so computer science really was the best option as far as I could see. And after that I was very fortunate to get a position with Rare as a programmer. So Nyamyam is our company that we started back in 2010, just after we both left Rare. And Jennifer and I came together whilst we were working at Rare during the making of Kinect Sports. And I think we kind of hit it off creatively almost immediately. And we both shared a dream of starting our own indie studio. And at the time, Kinect Sports was a really difficult project. It was a very demanding project and very creatively stifling, and actually incredibly stressful working with the Kinect technology that at the time we weren't even sure if it was actually going to work properly or not. And at peak the game had over 100 people, which was by far the largest project that I'd ever worked on before. And I think we both began to think, is this really the kind of thing that we want to do anymore? Do we still want to make these big games? Do we still want to work in this environment with so many people? And the answer was no, we didn't. And so when Kinect Sports finished, we decided we were going to make the jump and go indie. So after our first day when we kind of left Rare and we were kind of sitting there and we were thinking, I guess first of all we were thinking something like this, which was, hell yeah, we can do whatever we want. The sky's the limit. Let's party. Anything's possible. And then this was pretty quickly kind of followed by this, which was kind of a rising panic that actually we hadn't really thought this through all that much at all. Yeah, we weren't entirely sure what kind of games at that point we actually wanted to make. The idea for Tengami hadn't yet. We hadn't had the inspiration for that yet. So the first thing we kind of thought that we should probably do is actually think about what kind of games we want to make. What do we want Nyamyam as an indie studio to stand for? I guess kind of our creative statement and our creative motto. And this, we kind of came up with this statement, not immediately. This is something that kind of evolved over time as we actually made Tengami, the first year of the game. I've never been a fan of these kind of one-line mission statements and stuff like that. But this one sentence actually helps us create the game and will help us create games in the future. And sometimes we'll be doing something in the game and we will start to go off on a slightly different direction. And one of us will say, hang on a minute, this isn't what we actually set out to do. We need to refocus back on what we're doing. And I would suggest that if you're going to make a game, or not even just a game, but anything really, that you should have some kind of creative statement of what it is you want to achieve. And it can be completely different to what we're doing. It can be whatever you want. And I'm just going to touch quickly on these things, but not too much. Hopefully, beautifully crafted and sense of wonder, you should have some kind of a sense for what we mean by that. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the last two. So self-expressive, I think, is the thing that we were missing the most when we were actually working on Kinect Sports. And it's this idea that A game, when you make a game, it should say something about yourself. It should include a part of yourself. And that's not just a part of yourself in terms of the physical work that you put into it, but it's actually something that you feel strongly about. And this could be an emotion, it could be an experience you had, it could be something that inspired you in the past when you were younger, or something that inspires you currently. And I hope that when we show you Tengami in just a couple of minutes, that you will see what those strong personal influences are. And again, I think it's fundamentally important that you consider, especially if you're going to be indie, what it is that you're going to put into the game of yourself. And the last one, yeah, clearly I don't mean sex and violence. There's plenty of games in that kind of genre, although perhaps maybe not so many in the sex genre. What we want to do is address the rest of the emotional space, the rest of what it is to be human, and not just killing things. And we also believe that the player is actually intelligent and that they can appreciate subtlety in games. And so now we're gonna dive into the demo of the game. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the game before we actually show you. So we've been working on the game for 2 years now since we first started. We're probably about 6 months away from completion. It's for the iPad, and it was specifically designed for the iPad from the outset, or for touch devices specifically. And it's an adventure game where you play a character inside a pop-up book. So the whole world is constructed as if it was a pop-up book. And it's a very relaxing and slow-paced game where you manipulate these pop-ups to solve puzzles and progress, and ultimately to figure out what is going on in the world of Tengami. Okay, so I'm just going to do a little bit of commentary as we go along. So the game starts and you're just presented with a closed book, inviting you to open it. And this is done by simply, you probably can't see Jennifer here, but it's simply swiping your finger across the screen to actually open it, and you have full control over that. And the first part of the game is just a little bit of an intro narrative, I guess. So there can be smaller pop-ups that exist inside the bigger pop-up, which you can open separately. And you can also turn pages to progress through the game. And turning pages can actually represent the passage of time as it is here, as the scene changes from spring to autumn to winter. So here you're just bringing the character to life. And this tree has an important part to the story, but it's not explained at this point. So turning the page can also represent transitions of space as well as time. So here we've entered into a dark nighttime forest. Let's put the volume up. So the first bit we just establish the atmosphere and the feeling, and introduce the player to the idea of a pop-up world. And you can move the character just by, Jennifer's just double tapping where she wants the character to go. And here the player comes across a gap, and this is just, it's an automated thing, just to introduce the idea that pop-ups can open and close to help you create paths. And we're lucky to have David Wise doing the music for us, which is a kind of a Japanese inspired, but we didn't want it to be too Japanese because Japanese music can be very sparse and a little hard on the Western ear. So here the player comes across a river, and there seems to be no way across. But if you kind of look closely, there's a pop-up hidden within the river, and the player can manipulate that to create a bridge. Yeah, so this is just a little bit further on into the forest, and the player It's in front of a large torii gate. And they can enter inside. And there you can see like a full screen transition where the whole world actually folds down to be replaced by another part of the world. So the whole of the world in Tengami is actually constructed from pop-up. Even the parts that you don't see open and close could actually open and close if you wanted them to. So Jennifer's here. There was a gate with a little puzzle, and she's just going to solve that puzzle. So here there's an idea that you can go into and out of buildings and structures by turning the page. So Jennifer is controlling this to open and close it. And now we're inside the well. And you can manipulate these pull tabs, which are another feature of pop-ups, which allow you to manipulate the level of the water. And just to find this part of the key to get into the gate. So all of the landscapes and the architecture in the game is inspired by traditional Japanese architecture, and where possible we've actually based them on real locations in Japan, which you'll see in a minute. There's a shrine building which we actually use real architectural plans to try and create something similar. And we kind of believe that authenticity is important and that the player subconsciously at least picks up on these things. So here we open the gate, and again you can turn the page to reveal the shrine. And again, you can turn the page to go inside the building. And you'll see this flower, which is related back to the tree at the beginning. But we're not going to tell you too much about that now, because you'll find out about that if you play the game. And we'll leave the demo there. So hopefully after seeing that, there should be kind of two inspirations or ideas that strongly stick out. The first is the pop-up, and the second is the Japanese theme, the Japanese aesthetic. And these really were the two key inspirations for the game. And these are the two kind of personal things that I was talking about earlier. The idea for the pop-up came almost through chance, really. We were watching a YouTube video, of all things. A guy had made a short film, a short animation film of a pop-up, and it was really nicely animated. And it kind of sparked memories of when I was younger and the first time I ever encountered a pop-up book, and how fascinated I was by them. And I think I've always been fascinated since then by how things work, and I was amazed by how you could have this duality of something being flat and then something being three-dimensional. At the time, as a child, I didn't understand that, but obviously I do now. And so when we talked about this more, we thought, well, wouldn't it be amazing if you had a game that was completely set inside a pop-up world? And the other idea, the other theme is Japan, which is a pretty big theme. And I guess we all have an association and a kind of passion for Japan. It's particularly the more traditional side. And we wanted to try and portray a side of Japan that you don't see so much in games, which is more traditional and more based on arts and crafts and this idea of craftsmanship. And we were kind of a little bit tired of the stereotypical view in Japanese games of ninja and samurai and so forth. So we had these ideas, but ideas don't make a game. And so we weren't even sure at the beginning what this game would look like. And we made a number of false starts and mistakes. And Jennifer's going to now take over and talk through the kind of tech design and art story of how we got from those ideas to where the game is currently.
So when we had the idea of building a game set entirely in a pop-up world, we were faced with a dilemma. Technology to build authentically folding pop-up worlds do not commercially exist. There's no website where you can just go and buy this. And there are also actually no games using this kind of tech so that we could prove to ourselves that it's actually possible to make such a game. And whenever we saw pop-ups being used in interactive pop-up books or movies, they always seemed to be hand animated. And we knew that this kind of approach was not going to be feasible for a 3-person team because it's just not enough manpower to do it. So we knew that we were going to have to come up with some kind of custom toolkit that would allow us to create pop-ups automatically. On top of this, none of us had any clue how to actually build pop-ups with paper, let alone digitally. That was really not the best starting point. So as you can see on the next slide, we had to take a big leap of faith and believe that we would be able to overcome the technological challenges whilst also designing a compelling game. We started by learning how to make pop-ups just with paper, scissors, and glue. A big problem in that initial phase was to find the right instructional books. You could find a lot of books that had pretty pop-ups to make, but there were hardly any books to teach a coherent rule set. This was very frustrating, and we kept struggling to come to terms with the underlying principle. Without understanding these, though, it was impossible to create a mathematical model which could be understood by a computer. So about 6 weeks into the project, we were still unable to see any logic in this pop-up jungle. And at this point, we decided to go to London and browse through the hobbycraft sections of the big bookstores there. And it was in London that we finally came across a book that teaches pop-up as a logical and coherent rule set. And it's the book that you see here in the center on the slides. It's written by a lovely man called Duncan Birmingham, who teaches pop-up at the university. And with the explanations that are in this book, we were finally able to really understand pop-ups, and Phil was able to develop a mathematical model for the pop-up folds and build this into what we rather unimaginatively call the paper kit. And you see some screenshots of the paper kit here on the next slide. And it works very similar in the way that you use Lego, that you have a set of pop-up shapes that you can connect to each other to make really complex pop-up scenes. The first version of the paper kit was a big breakthrough moment for us. After a year of development, we had finally proven that the game was technologically possible, but we still had to figure out how this would translate into a game. A lot of people think that in game development, technology and art should always follow design, that design takes a lead, and technology and art basically try to fulfill what design gives them. But in our case, we do a completely different approach. In our case, design and art follow the lead of technology, because we have to make a game to the limitations of the existing technology. And we don't see this as a bad thing because, if you have these limitations, you can create a very coherent design and art vision. So next I'm going to talk about the design evolution of Tengami. Tengami is designed with the iPad as its primary platform in mind. We see the iPad quite a bit different to the iPhone because I think that they are used quite differently. For example, I use my phone mainly on the go. If I just want to, kill some time on the train or check a little bit of internet. The iPad, on the other hand, I would never get out on the train to just check the train times. The iPad I mainly use at home when I want to spend longer times with it. And I use it a lot more purposefully than the phone. We want Tengami to be a true iPad experience, a game with real involvement, rather than what you usually get on the phones, where it's just like a lot of these quick-to-play coin-collecting games. And coming from a Kinect game that was motion-controlled, we were really curious to start working on our first ever touch game and see how that compared to, of course, the motion-controlled game that we had worked on before, but mostly how does it compare to the controller-based games that we had worked on before. And as you will see in a short while, we actually made a lot of mistakes initially. So parallel to learning how to make pop-ups and developing Tengami's tech, we began collecting ideas for what the game would be. And this is one of like a very early mock-up image that I made in Blender. And you can see this little ninja character, and he's kind of like running on the rooftops and jumping from roof to roof. The thought behind that was that the ninja would have some kind of ability that would allow him to manipulate pop-ups. Because the paper kit was far from being finished at this moment, we started by pre-visualizing some gameplay ideas as videos. And I'm going to show you four of those videos next. It's basically like we're trying to see how manipulating the pop-up can be beneficial to the player. What you see here is a little bit similar to the first video, but what we were trying to see here is how can we use the pop-up like for more complex interactions. And this was one of the first scenes where we actually had several interactive pop-ups in one scene. So 9 months into the project, we were pretty much like hit rock bottom because the paper kit was still not ready, and we didn't even know if it was ever going to be ready. So we had absolutely no playable prototype. And what we did was we decided to take a work and a travel trip to Singapore. And that trip turned out to be actually a critical turning point for Tengami, because by some miracle, like a very initial and rough version of the paper kit came together. And for the first time, we were able to prototype all of these ideas that we had. Like we did prototypes of some of the scenes that you saw in the videos earlier. And what we unfortunately discovered was that the ideas that we had in the videos that we made did not really translate well onto the iPad as a touch-based game. We had made the mistake of designing the game around character actions that worked well with a controller in the same way that we had always done. We had always worked on console-based games before, so I guess that felt most natural to us. So we were thinking in terms of the character being the agent in the actions of the game. Touch devices, on the other hand, really suit like a different approach, the approach where it is that you as a player touch into this world on the screen, that you reach into the world, and that your finger can affect the world, you know, on your iPad. And yeah, this is why really like everything that we had done didn't work. As well as the mechanistic shortfall, we also realized that the game didn't live up to our creative ideals. You know, the things that Phil was talking about earlier. Like there was no sense of wonder to the game, and the approach was killing the beauty and joy of the pop-ups by focusing too much on action. So we did that we threw away the whole design that we had come up with so far, and that was heartbreaking in some ways, but we also knew that this was, you know, the right thing to do from the experience that we had on working on games. So we refocused on playing to the strengths of the iPad, world manipulation, rather than character actions, and to the strengths of the pop-ups, as well as keeping our creative ideals in mind. what we realized from the prototypes was that the simple act of just opening and closing the pop-ups, like that felt really, really good. And like, really gave you joy. And this was even just with the pop-ups that were like super simple and didn't look like anything. So Tengami was reborn, on this trip in Singapore as a slower-paced, more contemplative adventure game that focused on the sense of wonder that the pop-ups created. In the last part, I'm going to talk about the art evolution of Tengami. So the art style of Tengami is inspired by Japanese arts and crafts, and we are very fortunate that we are working with a talented Japanese artist. There's no way that we can make an authentic, Japanese a game with an authentic Japanese aesthetic without him. And it is really important to us that the game feels authentic, both with respect to the pop-up as well as the visual style. As Phil mentioned earlier, all of us have a really deep love for traditional, Japan, and I've lived there for 4 years, and I'm completely in love with the country and the people. And so what we are hoping to do with Tengami is make a game with an authentic visual style that is not stereotypical, like you see in a lot of games that try to go for a Japanese aesthetic without really understanding it. Early on, we thought that the paper would be the unifying idea behind the game, because pop-ups are made from paper, and paper making has a real tradition in Japan. And what you see here on the slides is a Japanese specialty paper, and paper in Japan is just called washi, and then there are many different styles of washi, and it's a little bit confusing. But I'm trying to we are dividing this into washi and CHIYOGAMI. CHIYOGAMI is what you see on the right-hand side. It's very colorful and has a lot of patterns. And the patterns can either be natural things, you get a lot of flowers, but can also be waves or wind, and sometimes you get abstract geometric patterns. Washi, on the other hand, and that is what you see in the bottom left corner, usually comes with more subdued colors and doesn't have any patterns unless it's by the fibers, or the way that they make the paper. It's basically not, it's not very intended. You will not get very symmetrical patterns out of it. And what we basically did is we started by exploring with these two ideas of washi and CHIYOGAMI. And what you see here are concept images that Rio did initially that only used CHIYOGAMI as textures for the game. When we saw these images, we didn't feel that they were the right approach for the game, because the problem is that when you have things that are very colorful and maybe also a little bit noisy because of the patterns, that this very easily creates an atmosphere as that it's something that is targeted as children and something that is very loud. Whereas we are looking for something with Tengami that supports the contemplative nature and almost the meditative gameplay. So we kept looking, and Rio came up with these. And this has a completely different vibe and atmosphere from the pictures before. And everything that you see is paper, even though if you look at the picture in the bottom right, that almost looks like oil. Even though it's minimalistic, it still has a really big impact on you. So we decided tentatively that we wanted to go further on into the direction of the more subdued washi. And at the point when we started fleshing out the first level, Ryu made these concept images, and these are were really like key images for us when it came to establishing the art style, because all of us, completely liked them, and these are the images that convinced us that we should, 100% focus on the approach with a minimalistic-looking washi. But what we found out was that even though we really liked these pictures in 2D, when we tried to make like 3D pop-up scenes with that kind of style, it didn't translate very well. So we then went ahead and did a couple of 3D concept art passes. We struggled to come to terms with how pop-ups work and what is actually physically possible. It is not very easy to see which parts of the pop-up can be modified by an artist. I make the basic pop-up structure, and that is what you see on the left-hand side. This is, just the pop-up folds connected together without any cuts. And I just put on it like a few, it's a little bit of simple texturing. And then the image that you see on the right is like a first pass on how this pop-up structure could be cut to give it like a real sense of what that location really is. And Rio did a lot of experimentation with what kind of styles to use for the cutting. And the red tree that you see here, this is also, I think this was the second 3D concept scene that we made. And when Rio sent this scene through, we decided that this is the style that we want to go for. And you saw the first level in the forest. And while it does not have, while it does not use like the right color, it is, it is the same texture that you see here, just tinted bluish, because the blue fitted better this atmosphere of the mysterious forest at night. There's of course like a lot more to talk about when it comes to the art style, but like we don't have enough time to touch on all the subjects. So in closing, I'm just going to give you like an overview of where we are, and I think then we have a few minutes for Q&A. So Tengami has been in development for almost 2 years now. As you saw, the first year was dedicated to learning how to make pop-ups and developing the technology to power a 3D, a folding world. We also decided to build our own engine and toolkit rather than going with something out of the box. Since about 6 months, we are tech complete, which means that we have all the important building stones in place to make the content for the game. Tengami has been shown this year in June at the Rest Game Show for the first time, and we were very relieved that it was positively received by the people who played it. And since then, we also were very fortunate to have been selected for the Sense of Wonder Night in Tokyo. The Sense of Wonder Night is part of the Tokyo Game Show, and every year they select 10 independently made games that showcase something unique and experimental, something that you don't see in any other game. And on top of that, which is probably the biggest recognition so far, is that we were nominated for the Indicate this year. And we were actually just last month in Los Angeles to show our game there. Yes, so Tengami will still be in development like for a good while, about 8 months, I think. The release is planned for summer 12/13, first on iOS and later on PC and Mac. Yeah, thank you a lot for listening and coming.